Unglued, the Book of Strafe by Bill Wetmore. Chapter 1, Strafe. Call me Strafe. My full name is Peter Caldwell Strafe. I don't even like saying the name. When I was in high school and college, my really close friends called me Jap because I'm half Japanese, but everyone else called me Strafe except for my parents. My dad calls me Pete. My mom calls me Peter. It's a name I hate. Other than Richard, Peter is the worst thing you can name a kid. You might as well just name him Penis, which is basically what all the kids called me when I was in grammar school. By the time I got to high school, I would only answer to Strafe. If a teacher tried calling me Peter, they were swiftly corrected. Once a high school biology teacher asked me what I had against my given name. I looked at her and asked how she would like it if her parents named her Pussy. I see your point, she said. When I was at Renfield College in Stoke, Connecticut, I switched my major like 4 times. I started off in pre-med, but after a year of organic chemistry, I decided that maybe I would switch to pre-law. I spent my sophomore year reading philosophical works by Plato and Immanuel Kant. Boring. Next, I decided to become a teacher. I took classes in early education and child development. By the end of my junior year, I decided that I hated kids, so teaching was out. My father sat me down after my junior year and talked to me about my inability to follow through on any of the decisions I'd made about the direction of my life after college. I don't understand you, Pete. You're a bright kid, but you need to develop some stick-to-itness, for lack of a better term. Your brother has stick-to-itness. That's why he's a lawyer. Stick-to-itness, I asked. You mean like perseverance? Exactly, my father said. Perseverance and gumption. Perseverance, gumption, and a little bit of grit. A little bit of grit and a whole lot of backbone. A little bit of grit and a whole lot of backbone mixed in with some gumption and perseverance is your recipe for success, Pete. Find your path and stick to it no matter what. Till death do you part, that kind of thing, right, Dad? Absolutely, Pete. Treat your future like a marriage. That's the key to any endeavor. Thanks for the talk, Dad. It really helped me clarify a lot of things about my future. I'm glad it could help, Pete. By the way, Dad, how's your divorce going with Mom? I ended up with a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature. I spent my entire senior year and a summer session before and after it reading books by a bunch of writers who were only slightly less boring than Nietzsche and Wittgenstein. The only writer I really enjoyed reading was Mark Twain. Actually, I liked The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Everything else he wrote was boring too. When I wasn't reading Moby Dick and Young Goodman Brown, I hung out in the dorm with my buddies drinking beer and smoking pot. At least I'd stuck to that all my years in college. The only other thing I stuck to in college was playing rugby. I was a blindside flanker, which meant I needed to stop any players breaking out of the scrum down the narrow side of the field. I was a good tackler and liked to hit opposing players low. As a result, I got my fair share of concussions when my head came in contact with the knees of the guys I was tackling. Altogether, I probably had close to 20 concussions playing rugby, but other than having a few problems with my memory and sometimes getting confused, the concussions weren't a big deal. I'd be foggy for a little bit, but I'd keep playing until the game ended. After games, we'd go to the campus pub and have contests to see who could drink the most beer or drink beer the fastest. I was pretty good, but Quint Jones, the loosehead prop, was the undisputed champ. He was the biggest player on the team. Someone had gouged out one of his eyes in a game his sophomore year. After a few beers, he liked to take out his fake eye, and he put it in your glass whether he liked you or not. "Here's looking at you," he'd shout. Anyone who refused to drink when Quint's fake eye was in his glass would have to fight him. Since he was the biggest guy on the team, no one would fight him but me. He'd toss his eye into my beer, and I'd launch myself at him like a missile. I'd always manage to get in a couple of punches before he'd hit me 3 or 4 times in the head with his gigantic fists, and I'd have another concussion. After I woke up, we'd shake hands like nothing had happened. But I never did drink a single beer contaminated by the loosehead prop's eyeball. Other than smoking pot in my dorm and drinking beer with the rugby team, I didn't do a lot of socializing. I had headaches from all my concussions and liked sleeping as much as possible. Bright lights bothered me, so I spent a lot of time hanging around my room with the curtains drawn. I'd lie in bed and fall asleep listening to soothing music like Jimi Hendrix or The Who on the stereo record player I'd bought for $5 at a yard sale. The speakers hardly buzzed at all. The only bad thing about the stereo was when you came to the end of a record, the tone arm wouldn't automatically lift up and shut the turntable off. The record would keep spinning, and the needle would keep playing the amplified silence in the grooves at the record's end. Most mornings I'd wake up, and the record would still be circling around and around. I had new roommates every year. Most of them didn't like it that I kept the room dark all the time, or that I slept until the afternoon, or that I kept Buffy, the psychedelic toad, in a terrarium on my desk. I had bought Buffy my sophomore year from a pharmacy major who was graduating. People would pay me up to $5 to lick Buffy because she exuded a toxin that produced hallucinations that were like taking acid. Only the trip was a lot shorter. I made people sign a waiver that basically said licking the toad could possibly kill them, but I had no shortage of customers. Word got around campus that I had a psychedelic toad, and people would knock on my door at all hours for the opportunity to lick him or her, as the case might be. The only roommate I had who didn't seem to mind living in the same room with me was a guy named Willie Wetmore. He was the kind of guy who laughed at stuff no one else found even remotely funny. I was taller than him and outweighed him by 20 pounds, but he was a hot shot on the Renfield wrestling team. I'd watched him get in fights with people twice his size and walk away without a scratch, while the other guy would be lying on the ground in a puddle of his own puke. You don't want to get in a fight with someone like that. He didn't just want to beat you, he wanted to humiliate you. Willie wasn't a toad licker, but he liked getting high after wrestling practice. We'd smoke pot together, and Willie would tell me about his plans after he'd graduated. I'm going to L.A., he'd say. I'm going to write for TV shows. My uncle works at a studio in Burbank, so I've already got a foot in the door. He had an internship at a local advertising agency that wrote ad copy for car dealerships and plumbing companies. Whenever we'd watch the Whalers play hockey on the TV down in the dorm lounge, Wetmore would wait for the commercials to come on and tell anyone who'd listen how he'd make the commercial better. I know what I'm talking about, he'd say. I got paid $10 for writing the jingle for Peter Piper Plumbing. If your toilet's clogged, don't worry. Call Peter Piper. They will hurry. We will handle all your gripes and quickly fix your pickled pipes. I wasn't sure how writing jingles for a plumbing company translated into writing for TV shows in Hollywood, but I didn't say anything to him. I discovered that artistic types are probably the most thin-skinned people on earth, so it wasn't worth taking the risk of upsetting him. All in all, I'd much rather have someone hit me in the head and give me a concussion than work me over so thoroughly that I'd be left lying in a puddle of my own vomit. I enjoyed talking to Willie, but sometimes the conversations left me confused, and not just because of my concussions. Once, just before graduation, Willie and I were hanging around our dorm room getting stoned. Willie had sold me an ounce of pot and then felt obligated to help me smoke it. We got good and high. Then Willie asked me what I was going to do after college. I want a dog, I said. Pet ownership is an unadmirable trait of the bourgeoisie, Willie said. You can't have Marxism without the end of pet ownership. What about Buffy? I asked. You're exploiting the sweat of that toad's secretions. Do you enjoy exploiting toads? In general, or are we just talking about Buffy? The forest is the tree, said Willie. Well, I like that people give me $5 to lick my toad, and all I have to do is feed her bugs. Charging money for toad licking is counter-revolutionary, Wetmore said. For the sake of social justice, you should share your toad with the masses for free. You sell pot, I said. You charge me $20 for an ounce. Why not give it away? What are you, crazy? Asked Willie. You need to understand that what you believe and say is more important than what you do. Your word carries more weight than your actions. Words are mightier than swords. Never forget that. God, I'm higher than fuck. Well, I'm giving Buffy away when I graduate, I said. Matt Tasukius is going to take her off my hands. He's a psychology major. He's a psychopath, said Willie. Have you ever listened to him talk about how he hates his mother? Plus, he doesn't shower. I'd never lick a toad owned by someone like him. Why would you leave Buffy with him? Because he's given me $50, I said. Money talks. It's counter-revolutionary to listen, said Willie. Anyways, I need to write a jingle for Nutmeg Used Cars. I'm supposed to get $15 if they like it. Isn't that counter-revolutionary, I asked. Obviously, you haven't listened to a word I've said. Well, it sounds like it's hypocritical. After the revolution, people like me will be in charge of deciding what's hypocritical and what isn't. You have to realize that anything that advances the causes of equality, justice, and revolution is acceptable. At some point, the hypocrisy of the proletariat will wither away by itself. Then what? I asked. Then what? What happens after the hypocrisy of the proletariat withers away? I don't know, said Willie. What do you mean you don't know, Willie? You just spent 20 minutes convincing me that being counter-revolutionary is bad. You believe that? I don't believe any of that. I was just pulling your leg. I'm an anarchist. I pretty much believe in sex and chaos. Politics is just for people who are too stupid or ugly to get laid on their own. Willie stopped talking and went back to his desk. He began writing a jingle for Nutmeg Used Cars. After about 2 minutes, he was done writing. Listen to this, he said. Need a car or need a truck, but have no money? Then you're in luck. Nutmeg Used Cars will finance your ride. With no cash down, you'll drive off in pride. We're number one. We'll show you why. Some restrictions do apply. Wow, I said. That's pretty good. You just whipped that out and like nothing flat. I'm going to learn to do that as good as you. Willie looked at me. I like you, Strafe. You're naive and pretentious at the same time. I'm going to write a book about you someday. You'll be the kind of narrator that the reader will love because of your naivete and laugh at for your pretentiousness. What do you mean? I asked. I'm not any more naive or pretentious than anyone else. Exactly, said Willie. Exactly? Why exactly? You're every man, said Willie. You are every man.